Cheat Code. Support Strategist by Clouds. Mahen the Clouds Not Coming Down on AO3. Chapter 41. Confusion. At this point, Hitoshi had just accepted that confusion was his default emotion. Being kidnapped and practically adopted by two kids his own age, who turned out to be mad scientist gremlins, had thrown him for a loop, sure, but that has nothing compared to whatever this situation was. At least he had confirmation that he had made it into the hero course. But going home with his teacher, who may or may not be waiting for him to go off the rails, was not what he had in mind when he woke up yesterday. He had the sneaking suspicion that Eraserhead hadn't been planning on it either. Sure, he hid his surprise well, but Hitoshi had seen the brief flash of surprise and maybe panic that had passed over his face before he managed to hide it. He didn't know why it hurt so much that Eraserhead was scared of him. Everyone was, so this shouldn't be any different. But in the few times they've interacted in the past, Hitoshi hadn't noticed any hesitation to talk to him. But from his obvious panic, and what Nezu told his former foster parents, they were doing this to make sure he didn't get tempted to switch sides. It hurt to know that, except for Mei and Izuku, Yue really wasn't that different after all. Hitoshi straightened his tie and pushed his thoughts from his head. He could get through this. He always did. It was just a matter of fading into the background and not talking more than he had to. As long as he behaved, Eraserhead wouldn't have any reason to kick him out of his house, and by extension, probably the hero course as well. No pressure. Despite that fact, he knew this was just a precautionary arrangement. It was still trippy to leave his room and see Eraserhead and Present Mike sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. It was like running into his teachers at the grocery store, but worse. Present Mike grinned as he came into the room, practically bouncing in his seat with excess energy. "Hey there, little listener. How'd you sleep?" Hitoshi shrugged, and Eraserhead slapped Mike upside the head, probably to shut him up so he wouldn't encourage Hitoshi to say anything. "Don't be so loud. Sashi, the kid just woke up. Besides, it'll be a miracle if he slept at all with the way you snore." "Hey," Mike squawked. Hitoshi chuckled despite himself, then froze. Laughing didn't really count for his quirk, but did his teachers know that? Would they get angry at him? He looked up hesitantly, only to see Eraserhead smiling like he just won something, and Mike shaking his head in amusement. Okay, so they were glad he was laughing at their joke, and he wasn't going to get in trouble for laughing. Good to know. "Do you want any breakfast?" Eraserhead asked, frowning when Hitoshi shook his head. "Are you sure? We have omelets, but we can make you something else if you like." Hitoshi just shook his head again. He didn't want to cause any trouble on his first day, and he never really got hungry until later anyways. There was always lunch, and Izuku had a stash of snacks in his room for emergencies anyways. He was fine. Eraserhead sighed heavily, while Mike looked worried, and Hitoshi had a sinking feeling he had done something wrong. But it was too late to take back his decision, so he just adjusted his backpack and waited for them to say anything else. Was he supposed to walk to school or wait to leave with them? What was the protocol when you were living with your teachers? After another minute or two of heavy silence, Mike stood up and took his plate to the sink. "All right, you ready to go, little listener?" Hitoshi nodded as Eraserhead stood and grabbed his keys. "Let's go then. It's your first day in the hero course, so it's going to be a long day. Your new classmates are a bunch of annoying brats, but you're used to dealing with Power Loader's gremlins, so it'll be nothing new." Hitoshi snickered. It was always funny to see how the teachers reacted to Mei and Izuku. It was almost funnier than seeing the students' reactions, which was also hilarious. Eraserhead had seemed to support the two during the sports festival, so maybe living here wouldn't be too bad. Even if they were just waiting for him to mess up and turn villain, as long as he respected Hitoshi's friends, that was the important part. Mike talked the entire drive to UA, and Hitoshi was almost tempted to ask him a question just to get him to shut up. Eraserhead nodded along and made interested hums at all the right places, but obviously wasn't fully listening to what Mike was saying. The weird part was that Mike seemed to know that and was totally fine with it. It was like the two had the silent agreement that Mike could talk as much as he wanted to about anything under the sun, and Eraserhead would just be there. He could see Mei and Izuku doing that too, but they would probably have to take turns as the listener. Otherwise, neither of them would ever shut up. When they got to school, Mike kissed Eraserhead on the cheek, which surprised Hitoshi, even though they lived together, and left towards the general education part of the building. Hitoshi almost followed him out of habit, only to find himself being yanked back by Eraserhead's capture weapon around his waist. When he turned back, Eraserhead was just raising an amused eyebrow at him. Just where do you think you're going? You're in the hero course now, or did you forget? Hitoshi slammed his mouth shut. Just because he was at UA didn't mean he was welcome to speak. This guy was still suspicious of him. He glanced up at Eraser, hesitantly, but to his surprise, instead of getting angry, Eraserhead's face had softened into something like pity or maybe understanding. You know, you're always allowed to talk here, right? No one's gonna force you, of course, but neither Mike nor I are ever going to punish you for talking. You're going to be a hero with that quirk, so it would be illogical to resist your usage of it. Do I make myself clear? Hitoshi nodded again, and Eraserhead just sighed and started walking towards 1A. It was a nice sentiment, but it could also be a trap. It didn't seem very hero-like to bait him like that, but then again, Eraserhead was infamous for his logical ruses, so it was better to stay on the safe side for now. Eraserhead paused for a moment when they reached the door to UA. By the way, you didn't ever actually write those apology letters your foster father wanted you to, did you? Hitoshi nodded, confused. They were tucked away in his bag, and he wasn't looking forward to delivering them, but he was glad he actually written them, if Eraser was asking. But then again, that also meant he couldn't just completely forget to deliver them or anything. Ugh, rip them up. Eraserhead scowled, and Hitoshi did a double take. Or have Hatsume explode them or something, I don't care. Before Hitoshi could even react to that, much less process, Eraserhead pushed open the door and walked into the classroom. Hitoshi's eyes widened as he took in the chaos happening in the class, and then widened even more when everyone just stopped the moment they saw Eraserhead open the door. Good morning, brats, Eraserhead announced. Good job on the sports festival, but don't get too cozy. Your torture is just beginning. Shinso, you're in the empty seat. Let's get started. His initial judgment of the man had definitely been correct. He was even scarier than Izuku. And yeah, I heard he was totally creeping on some of the third years over break. Mina shuddered. I almost wish there hadn't been an empty seat so you could have kicked him out, Shinso. Hitoshi wasn't quite sure how he ended up walking to lunch with a group of students from UA, but as soon as class ended, Uraraka had pretty much immediately grabbed his hand and started dragging him along, most of the girls from class following into pace and filling the air with gossip. He was starting to relax a little more now that he wasn't around Eraser, well, Aizawa, who, considering his instructions about the letters, might not actually be judging him. Still, he didn't want to mess up his chances now that he was finally in the hero course, so it was better to, on the side of caution, at least around the hero course students. Yeah, Mineta's pretty bad, Jiro laughed. But at least, what the actual... He practically ran into Jiro's back as she stopped, suddenly in the middle of the hall. He looked to see what had shocked her and somehow wasn't really surprised to see Mei and Izuku hanging from the ceiling, dust in their hair, as they grinned at them. Extra Critic-kun, you made it in! His classmates, with the exception of Uraraka, gasped at them, and a couple looked around in confusion, trying to figure out who they were talking about. Izuku took a breath to say something else, on to sneezing violently, which wouldn't have been nearly as bad if he'd actually been hanging onto anything. Instead, he probably would have fallen out of the ceiling if Uraraka hadn't removed his gravity in time. Thanks, Uraraka. Izuku smiled brightly. Still upside down, as Mei started dragging him back up into the ceiling, and Uraraka returned his gravity. Hitoshi, you have to see this. It's so cool. Hitoshi was just trying not to laugh as both Mei and Izuku reached down, grabbing one arm each and just pulling him up into the ceiling. He tried to imagine how that must have looked to anyone who wasn't familiar with his kidnappers, and that just made him laugh even harder. He pulled himself up the rest of the way into the ceiling, and Izuku started shaking dust from his hair as Mei poked her head back down into the hallway. Don't worry, we'll return him after lunch. Just make sure he gets back in time for class. Uraraka's voice echoed with laughter. Have fun and don't kill him before he can be a hero. Hitoshi's shoulders shook in laughter as Mei slammed the secret panel closed, cutting off the sound of his classmates, freaking out as he turned to his kidnappers. So, what did you want to show me? We got into the tunnels. Mei's eyes were wide, and he could see the crosshairs in her eyes zoom in and out as she looked behind him and took in every detail. Hitoshi just chuckled. I can see that. It took so long, Izuku rambled. Every single door is locked with like a different puzzle, and we haven't found all of them, but most of the doors out are also locked, which is kind of fun. We've been here since yesterday. What? Hitoshi crawled after them. He didn't know if all the tunnels were this small, but it wasn't really a problem for Mei or Izuku since they were pretty short. Did you even sleep? Not important. Mei waved a hand dismissively. We've been exploring. These tunnels lead everywhere. We can get to the labs even after hours, not to mention the practice grounds and the classrooms, the staff areas. But that's not even the best part, Izuku interrupted. Obviously, not many people ever find them, so some of the tunnels are pretty dusty, but Nezu did design them to be explored. There's even... Oh, here we are. Hitoshi panicked slightly as Mei and Izuku literally just fell and disappeared. He moved forward more slowly and screamed when he realized that one of the floor panels was actually a hologram. He hit the floor with a small oof and rubbed his head as he looked around and found a nest. A half-dozen blankets were spread across the floor and were folded against the floors. There was a mini fridge and a cupboard that Mei was putting cookies out of. Izuku poked his chest and held out a container from Lunch Rush. Is this where you guys slept? Hitoshi asked, taking the food. I mean, more power to you, but is it comfortable? Izuku shrugged. Some of the others are more so, but this one's more central and it has a fridge. Got it. Hitoshi nodded and took a bite of his lunch. Yeah, confusion was definitely just his life now, but honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way. Okay, so we're getting a lot more of Hitoshi, and being with Aizawa and Hisashi. So I'm looking forward to that. I really like Eraser Mike adopts child. Preferably, I like it when it's Izuku, but I do not mind when it's Hitoshi. And I especially love it when it's Eri. But we're getting a little more of, them, the gays, my favorite gays. And also the tunnels. I'm very interested on where the tunnels is gonna go, and I need somebody to animate, or I need to see a visualization of Hitoshi being dragged up from the ceiling by Hatsume and Izuku. Because something about that, that would be hilarious. That is the most, imagine you're just a student, right? I don't know, you're like in general ed or something, and you're walking down that hall, and then all of a sudden you just see this kid being dragged up from the ceiling, and then the ceiling panel just closes, and that kid's not to be seen again. That is, I would scream and then run away. I would scream and then run away. But yeah, it's very interesting. The tunnels, I wonder where that's gonna lead, or if it's just one of those cute little tidbits. If it's just a cute little tidbit, I do not mind. I think it's hilarious, and I love it. Especially considering there's this one TikTok where, Nezu goes into the vents and just starts crawling through all of UA to get to Aizawa, and once he gets to Aizawa, he's like, ding dong. I love it. I love the whole Nezu and Aizawa being secret best friends. It's a personal headcanon of mine, and you can't tell me otherwise. You can't tell me otherwise. But this was such a cute, not episode, hold up, chapter. It was such a cute chapter. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it, and I cannot wait for tomorrow's chapter. God damn, why do I want to say episode? As always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night, join our community Discord server, link is in the description, subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.